Trump is set to deliver a speech on the tax bill this afternoon. For more now, we're joined by the House Minority Whip, Congressman Steny Hoyer. Congressman, thanks so much for joining us. We do appreciate it.
Thank you, Melissa. Glad to be with you.
I want to ask first about what has gone on in Alabama and if at all that changes the tax vote. Your colleague, Senator Chuck Schumer, is seeking to delay a vote until after Doug Jones is seated as senator. Do you support that? And what are the chances, do you think, that that could actually happen?
Well, I think that would be very appropriate. As a matter of fact, Mitch McConnell thought it would be very appropriate after Scott Brown was elected in January 19th of 2010. The day after, Senator McConnell said there ought to be no more votes on the ACA until Scott Brown was seated. The theory being that we had a new senator, the public had spoken. He pointed out in Massachusetts, we point out in Alabama, neither one of our home states, if you will. So it should be delayed. Chuck Schumer is absolutely right. We have a new senator, a new voice that has been elected in Alabama, and that voice ought to be heard on arguably one of the most important pieces of legislation, I think one of the worst pieces of legislation that we've considered in a very, very long time that will cause the country great harm. So I think McConnell was right in 2010. I think Schumer is right in 2017, and we ought to follow both of their advice.
What is the procedure for this happening?
Well, the procedure for this happening would have to be the Senate would agree to seat Doug Jones prior to final certification if there is no challenge. And I don't think there's going to be a challenge. And it is a pretty good victory for Mr. Jones. We do that in the House of Representatives all the time. Before certification of the vote, we say there is no contest and we will seat the member. And some members we seat the day after they're elected, which I think is appropriate.
Do you feel renewed hope, Congressman, that perhaps the Democrats could actually defeat a tax bill?
I certainly hope we can defeat this tax bill. It is a terrible tax bill for working people, a terrible tax bill in blowing a hole in the deficit and the debt. And if offered by Democrats, this tax bill would have received no Republican votes. On the debt issue alone, $1.7 trillion added to the national debt, which our children are going to have to pay. And in the process, it raises taxes on 72 million Americans and gives the resources that Speaker Ryan talked about struggling Americans. The resources don't go to struggling Americans. The resources go overwhelmingly to the richest people in our country and the corporations. We need a tax reform bill. But we also harm veterans in the process. We take the work opportunity tax credit away, which has led to 300,000 veterans being employed. This is a bill that has not seen the light of day, that has not had any hearings, has not had any witnesses to come before. And most economists believe, A, it will not be paid for, and will leave at least $1 trillion debt. And secondly, it will not have the positive effect on the economy that its proponents argue. So it's a bad bill. It ought to be defeated.
Congressman, when it comes to the math, though, it seems like that's an uphill battle, to say the least. Given our residence in a high-tax state, though, many of us are focused on the deductibility of state and local income tax.
Right.
There were a number of blue state Republicans who I believe supported the bill in the House. Is there any hope? Shouldn't say hope. Do you have any expectation they may change their vote, as this has started at least to gain a bit more currency among some of their constituents as a real concern?
Well, I think it is a real concern to an awful lot of states that have significant number of Republicans representing them, and I think those Republicans voted against their state's interest and their taxpayers' interest. So, yes, I think there will be some rethought. I frankly think there's some rethought as a result of the election last night, where it is clear that Republicans in Virginia, in other states as well, in Alabama, even in Maine, where you saw the voters who have a Republican governor who was against extending Medicaid under the ACA, voted 60-40 to do so against the wishes of their governor. So I think you're seeing all over the country a disgust with the present leadership of our country, a disgust with the Congress's inability to work, and a support for Democratic positions on the Affordable Care Act and on this tax bill, where you see some 60% of Americans saying they have no doubt that this is a tax bill for the wealthiest in America and not for them. This is a tax bill that will take us backwards, hurt our economy, hurt the taxpayers. We need tax reform. We can work on tax reform in a bipartisan way. We need to bring down the corporate rate to make it more competitive. So there are many things on which we can agree. But this bill is a bad bill, and I think no Republican is voting for it on the basis of policy, but on the basis of politics.
Once this is resolved either way, Congressman, you got any visibility on what infrastructure may look like other than what's been reported? And what would the Democrats be looking for or put on the table?
Well, we need an infrastructure bill, but it's sort of like health care, taxes, infrastructure, jobs. The president said he was going to do all of those. He hasn't offered a single bill on any one of those issues, including infrastructure. He's just waited upon the Congress to do so, and they haven't done so very successfully, the Republican majority. But we need an infrastructure bill. I think there's broad agreement that we need to invest a very, very substantial amount of money in our infrastructure, not only in roads and bridges, but our internet, our grid, our ports, our airports. We need to make sure that we are competitive with the rest of the world on infrastructure. And we don't have a bill from the president. There's been a lot of discussion. Pete DeFazio, who's the ranking member of the Transportation and Infrastructure Committee, has a bill. Obviously, he's included in there some revenues for that bill. And that's the key, revenues. Where are you going to get the revenues? John Delaney, my colleague, has a bill in as well.
Congressman,
yes.
We're running out of time. Real quickly, though, you really don't think you got a shot here. I mean, do you?
A shot at what?
A shot at winning. This vote's going to happen next week. Jones is not going to get seated in time. The House is going to vote in favor, and it's going to become law. Don't you think that's the highly likely outcome?
I hope not. I think it's a bad bill, bad policy, and bad for the country. And I would hope that at least one or two Republican senators would come to that place. I think Susan Collins is not a guaranteed vote at all. She thought she had a deal. It appears that Paul Ryan says, no, there was no deal. And I think that they're going to continue to put at risk health care for some 13 million Americans. And I think they're going to put at risk prices for everybody who has health insurance in America. So if that happens, I would be shocked if Susan Collins voted for this. So we'll see. But I haven't lost hope that good will prevail any more than I lost hope in the voters of Alabama that they wouldn't use good sense to vote for decency and good order and common sense in the United States Senate race, which they did last night. I still hope that the United States Senate will do the same.
Congressman Hoyer, thank you. Steny Hoyer, House Minority Whip.
When we come back, that tax plan's still in flux, but the wealthy are getting out ahead.